This video is sponsored by KnucklesOX, as well as Obito, who requested this topic. If you'd like to directly support my content, as well as catch it early, have your name credited as a sponsor, or maybe even your What If ideas produced as commissions, consider visiting stuff like my Patreon found in the description below. If Naruto learned the clone training trick early, it's such an incredibly interesting question, and while I do commonly say that in my videos, I more sternly mean it here, since this is one of those deceptively simple questions that once you really get into it, threatens to kinda almost unravel the entire Naruto timeline as we know it. By that I mean, in the simplest terms of asking the question what if, it's a change that could have a profoundly different impact on the story, and would most certainly deviate from Kishimoto's intentions at some point or another. It's also a question that, like most other what if questions, could be answered in multiple routes, from the extremely cold-cut and hard-line logical approach to try and approximate something close to the creator's intent, being one end of the spectrum, and the more free-form fanfiction route one could take where a change like this would likely be lost in the ways the initial ripple is meant to create, since it also happens to be one of those concepts to me that is more interesting in a kind of power play OP-D&D sense, or more power scaling lens, than the idea of telling an actual story. Despite that, Naruto utilizing this trick early in the story is something I think most fans think of when this concept is introduced in Naruto and Kakashi's training during the Immortal Devastators arc, hence why it exactly may be a small or even larger plot point that gets covered so often in such a wide range of Naruto fan works, fan manga, comics, fanfic, and what ifs as well, and usually at varying levels of depth and complexity or wildness of headcanon and creativity. The thing is, to my knowledge, there isn't a lot of stuff that delves into just how expansive this could end up being, as in my opinion, not even needing to learn the Rasengan really, and just with mastery of shadow clones, transformation jutsu, and maybe a bit of understanding of wind chakra, Naruto could have progressed into a character with a fighting style that was still extremely expressive of his character and philosophy, as well as the progression of both, visually and mechanically interesting on both manga panels and in animation, and most importantly, unique and creative using the power system of the verse in order to help him avoid the boring MC power set trope. But first, it's important to remind everyone of the basics of the clone training trick trope before we get into this, as back in the days of Boruto's dad having his own story, not long after the time skip in the beginning of the Shippuden era, Naruto returned from his 2.5-year time skip of training with Jiraiya to resume his pursuit of Sasuke, eventually establish a stable retaliation against the efforts of the Akatsuki, and complete his dream of becoming the Hokage. When we first caught back up with him, he took a Kakashi alongside Sakura and a run back of the bell test, in which he was noted by the copy ninja to be pretty impressive. And then later on, he fought against Deidara a bit. This showed off how much he'd grown literally physically, and with his Rasengan, which we all meme on, even though number one, a giant Rasengan is cool, and number two, that joke is a bit overly cynical as it glosses over the fact that most ninja couldn't even pull off a giant Rasengan, let alone a normal Rasengan chakra-wise. At least not without depleting a great deal of their own reserves or without burning through all of it in one go. And sure, this is more a feat of insane chakra reserves from both Naruto and other users who are able to get multiple attacks out of it in one go, or at least, one long rest or so. But it should just be stressed and noted a lot more often that this kind of chakra cost does entail that the jutsu itself would qualify as an ultimate technique for a lot of other shinobi in the series. For example, your Rukas and your Ebisus. Those are the kind of shinobis who it would really benefit to put the training no matter how many years or decades it would take to try and learn the Rasengan, just because the benefits would be that worth it. And the idea of those guys reaching a point of being able to increase the size of Rasengan even just a little bit, let alone a giant size one, would already probably put them in the upper echelons of what their full potentials likely are, as it'd be a major boon for their attack potency, chakra control, and battle experience in general. Since these are ninja, they really only care about landing that one decisive blow, and if that's the most devastating one they can manage, then it's worth it. Ignore the fact that it's swirly blue magic stuff. And this idea is another topic we'll return to talking about a bit later. Aside from his raw power, Naruto's basics and his fundamental skills had also increased pretty drastically. He had basically begun to invent his own form of taijutsu and movement that relied on his shadow clone mastery, which also grew alongside his chakra control. And that scrappy, kinda untamed brawler part of him was still there, fueling all of it along the way. It was more like his battle instincts and IQ got more refined and sharpened to kind of increase the effectiveness of this stuff. But for the most part, it was still the Naruto we knew in terms of his kit and what he could do. The intention kind of just being Kishimoto wanted to demonstrate Naruto getting a certain level of time stronger. If this was Dragon Ball or One Piece, we'd be talking something like 10 or 100 times times the ninja he was when we last saw him. It was just kind of hard to demonstrate that by him being stronger, taller, louder, and having a bigger Rasengan. So aside from his resolve and maybe his endurance, a lot of his skills and stats, so to speak, don't really get highlighted as well as they should have. But if he, for example, with this amount of power went back in time and tried the Sasuke retrieval arc again, there's really little doubt in my mind that he would complete the mission pretty much flawlessly, especially with his backup, both the other members of his team and the fact that we're not even talking about anything involving the Nine Tails at this point, or summoning, which in retrospect Naruto himself likely would have employed. At the same time, that's really not saying all too much, as putting the Shippuden versions of any of those characters back in their places when they were doing the Sasuke retrieval arc, they no doubt also would have done a lot better than in canon, and because of that, the arc also could have gone easier and ended in a victory for the heroes. Like if Kiba just instantly tears Sakon and Ukon apart and they just keep moving and never lose him as a team member, then the next member of the Sound 5 has to deal with maybe 2 opponents and they get beaten earlier, and then it keeps rolling on like that until just everyone's sitting there like, hey Sasuke, come on back buddy, or you're gonna get jumped and then we're gonna bring you back anyway. Speaking of Sasuke, he's really the reason that Naruto's post-time skip power doesn't really get all that much reverence, since all these factors that we've talked about so far proved to not be enough during the first reunion of Team 7, as Sasuke's training was simply more beneficial from a myriad of reasons, like the fact that he was trained with the only Sannin stronger than Jiraiya. He had fairly top-notch facilities to train in with access to pretty much whatever he wanted, be it high-grade shinobi steroids, medical ninjutsu, or sparring partners, with this all being on top of the fact that he is an Uchiha with an extremely ambitious goal, and that alone is enough to make a shinobi pretty damn strong. So we often focus on how impressive Sasuke's growth was, as he arguably took himself from maybe mid to high Chunin or maybe low to mid Jonin level to low to mid Kage level in less than 3 years. And he did it by kind of pushing and stressing himself harder while using a better means for his training, truly mastering his newly acquired lightning chakra nature to the point of evolving an A-rank jutsu made by Kakashi to have multiple variants, while also improving his natural affinity to fire to an even greater level of refinement of his already built-in harmony and strength in the element from his hot Uchiha blood, granting extra efficiency pretty much. However, it really shouldn't be disregarded that Naruto himself by this point was also likely nearing an elite Jonin to low Kage level on account of this version of him certainly being comparable to characters like Zabuza or pre-timeskip Kakashi, and he was most certainly mid to high Kage level when using as much of Kuroma's power as he could manage at this point. Again, the key issues are mostly that in comparison to all Orochimaru had to offer and provide, and the fact that there were just some stark ethical differences that also factored into the efficacy of the training from the Sannin, Sasuke just comes out on top here, which makes Naruto's growth feel less significant than it actually was. However, I would offer it was just as balanced and well-rounded in its results, at least a bit. This shrinking of the distance between rivals is thus followed up on the B-plot of the Immortal Devastators arc, and or the prelude to it if you go by the anime. After this first class since their fight at the Valley of the End, Kakashi proposes that Naruto could possibly close the gap completely and surpass Sasuke with his own signature / custom ultimate ninjutsu, and the method of achieving this was a concept devised by Kakashi, which could realistically only work for Naruto, which is of course the clone training trick or method or what have you. Essentially, because Naruto had always used his shadow clones for more direct combats rather than any kind of stealth, sabotage, intel, or scouting work, he had never fully grasped the other function of the jutsu as a means to log information and experiences, since after they are dispersed, anything a shadow clone learns is logged by the user, as they are connected to their own chakra through both their physical bodies and their spirits or soul, which we also know is an actual metaphysical reality in the world of Naruto. Obviously, physical developments cannot be accomplished through the clones, since otherwise any injuries they took on will also be reflected onto the user. But that said, things like muscle memory and instinct can be developed by them, since that's all elemental, and the cost is just what you spend in chakra to create a shadow clone, as well as the strain of loading and logging all the information at once, since it taxes the brain like it would any kind of non-flesh computer. Since via genjutsu, we also know that chakra can interact with the brain in some very interesting and also devastating ways. And this is kind of the key point, because this means this training method also has another danger aside from just regular chakra exhaustion. There is a real risk that you log so much information that you pretty much just turn what's between your ears into a microwave. However, that's never really all that explored, since using the clone training trick, Naruto was able to essentially multiply his experience gains while minimizing the training he had to actually go through to earn it. This allowed him to vastly increase his chakra control and even further refine it, since the Rasengan teaches a near perfect mastery of changing chakra form already. It also allowed Naruto to master his natural chakra nature affinity of wind in an impressive time of less than a week or two. In fact, I think in comparison to the Rasengan, which took 7 days to learn, this took like 2 days maybe. A task which via Sasuke's feats as a genius we could assume at best would take a talented shinobi with multiple factors aiding their growth at least 2.5 years years or so. He then went on to use this experience in a step-by-step process to complete the Rasengan as it was originally intended to be by the 4th Hokage, learning how to add chakra natures to the raw ball of spiraling chakra to achieve extra power and a secondary effect, aside from it just being a devastating attack. Also around this time in the anime through filler, Naruto spends some extra time learning to perform collaborative ninjutsu with the Toads, alongside the one he practiced with Captain Yamato, using a basic wind-style Rasengan, which was pretty advantageous experience for him. We never really get to see Naruto learn a basic elemental ninjutsu, since that would help us know the time frame that task for Naruto specifically as well takes. And even though if you've seen any of my or anyone else's what ifs or fanfics, there are multitudes of elemental ninjutsu that could have fit Naruto and may have been very useful to him in his earlier adventures. And he would go on to later snag a few by the time his greater hero's journey was kind of wrapping up. But the Shadow Clone training method would work for accelerating the learning of other kinds of ninjutsu as well. And to boot, the vast majority of elemental ninjutsu never really exceed the A rank. While in contrast, mastering and completing the Rasengan and then using all the variations you could do with it are pretty easily S+ rank as a difficulty. So it's also well within Naruto's wheelhouse by say the Search for Tsunade arc. So even though we don't canonically know a standard time frame to learn most regular elemental jutsu, fanon and headcanon can always come into play for an estimate, since there's things like Naruto 5e for example you could reference for the time it would take to do such a thing. Since many of the rulings they have for these features of the verse I do agree with because they are meant to balance difficulty, investment, struggle, and progression in a similar way to most narratives, and it's made as a homebrew tabletop gaming system by fans of Naruto who want to capture that feel of the series accurately. Both the cool uplifting power fantasy part of it and the gritty, realistic, horrifying ninjas at war parts of it. For example, as you would assume and as is shown by the series, things like having a master/teacher of some form or another to instruct you drastically increases the downtime/training needed to learn something new versus trying to do so self-taught, which also assumes the learner knows and has some reference for what they actually want to learn. For example, if Sasuke for some reason did not know he was trying to learn the fireball jutsu or just kind of feeling it out naturally, then his self-taught time frame to learn the jutsu would be a lot larger. Or consider the ruling of there being an inability for a ninja to learn techniques that are more than one rank above what they are normally capable of. Or rather, if it is not an inability, then it is an extreme difficulty. So say if you have only so far learned E or D rank jutsu like the most basic chakra enhancements of the body or regular clone and transformation jutsus, you'd most likely only be a D rank ninja. Thus, the best you could hope to achieve realistically at that level currently would be to learn a C rank jutsu, regardless of if you have a great master and a whole bunch of downtime, because a B rank would presumably be both too high in chakra cost and the amount of control needed to actually cast it. Thus, even if you did learn it, it would be pretty much useless to you. And because you would be attempting something that you're truly not ready for, the required amount of time out of combat to put your full concentration and focus on the task of mastering it would also likely increase. Hence the need for it to be done during specified training and downtime rather than through sheer force of will or adaptation in the midst of combat, since that's usually what you want to save for your really big moments in the narrative. For example, Naruto landing that first Rasengan against Kabuto. As Naruto D&D rules it, to learn a new jutsu, E rank costs 2 total hours when self-taught and 1 with the master. D rank costs 3 hours self-taught and 2 with the master. C rank is a ramp up in difficulty, costing 6 hours self-taught and 4 with the master. B rank is 12 hours self-taught and 8 with the master. A rank is 20 hours self-taught and 16 with the master. And S is 40 hours self-taught and 24 with the master. I believe these time frames also apply to learning things that aren't classically ninjutsu, and they are only accounting for what it takes to actually learn the jutsu, not what it takes to attain full mastery and proficiency with it. It also doesn't account for the fact that many ninjutsu and techniques build off the use of other ones you may have to learn. So even though it doesn't say it on the label, to learn the fireball jutsu, you may first need to learn the long chakra enhancement jutsu, which adds on to your fireball training, as would learning a change in nature or form likely. By the way, attentive fans of Kenchi's 618's Better Left Unsaid fanfic will likely realize that a long chakra enhancement jutsu is an actual concept that has been thought up by fans before, as by the virtue of that story focusing a bit more on Asuma Sarutobi being a sensei of Naruto in that timeline, there are discussions about the fact that Asuma would later negatively influence Naruto to pick up the bad habit of smoking. However, he kind of defends himself with this by making the argument that he doesn't actually smoke really and truly, or at least doesn't let any of the effects of it enter his body, since he uses a kind of wind-style lung chakra enhancement jutsu, using it to basically eviscerate and super filter out all the actually harmful parts of cigarettes, while Naruto would be avoiding all the harmful aspects via his passive Jinchuriki healing. Beyond all this, when it comes to the D&D lens of what it takes to learn a new jutsu, it is also just a total summation of hours needed towards the discipline, kinda like a college credit system. So it's not exactly that you're putting in every hour in one sitting, but it does mean the objective of actually learning it won't officially be done until the hours have been completed. And on a kind of macro scale, because D&D is meant to be a sort of power fantasy where you are a bit better than the average Joe, you could really hit all those time frames both with master and self-taught with a time 10s multiplier. So that under regular circumstances, or just, if you're talking about how it was in the academy or something like that, it's a bit closer to 20 to 10 hours to learn an E-rank jutsu, since that would also make a lot of sense for trying to teach kids the little stuff. As child ninja soldier or not, they are still children, and attention spans and their actual endurance at that age would still come into play. Should also be mentioned that this system doesn't account for any possible roadblocks or interruptions, setbacks, or just basic needs other than training. Like the fact that even ninja will still need to eat, sleep, and poop at some point. Their master will have to as well at some point, so they won't even always be able to chip away at the hours with that doubled rate. All in all, it is not a bad base to run off though, since with different factors you could approach it differently. Is the jutsu being made completely from scratch? Then a master may not be as helpful, and the time frame may be longer as there isn't much reference to go on. This illustration should also show why clone training and the idea of cutting down on the time it takes to accomplish the goal of said training is so extremely impressive and significant in this world, just as a feat of pretty stark dedication and hard work as well as skill, since even without access to the Kekkei Genkai, Jinchuriki abilities, and clan techniques that offer all kinds of crazy meta-breaking hacks in the world of Naruto, training and effort do pay off if you have the time to apply and the luck to not die before you grow from the experience of harsh battles. In fact, to illustrate further how far the trick could have been pushed in just its debut, if all it takes for Naruto is 2 free days for training, the spare time and chakra to upcast Shadow Clone Jutsu several hundred times over, and most importantly, knowledge of effective training methods that can be gradually upscaled to different elements like the leap cutting method could be, that would mean Naruto could more than likely learn the other 4 base natures in a similar time frame. Even if he didn't do that and simply chose to further sharpen his wind mastery in the same way Sasuke and the Uchiha seem to push their nature release jutsu beyond the bounds of what most ninja usually think possible, especially when it's fire style, or in Sasuke's case, even his lightning style, Naruto likely could have achieved that same level of chakra nature mastery in a few days as well. Actually, he kinda did just by the virtue of the Rasenshuriken being an S-rank wind style ninjutsu, which would therefore make future endeavors with wind release even easier thanks to that greater affinity, as I could see him just straight up making a purely wind style counter jutsu to Sasuke's Kirin that half uses naturally occurring forces and half nature transformed chakra to pull off a powerful S-rank jutsu, kinda in that way where the Kirin feels like a sage art even though it's not an actual sage art. Imagine something like a Tengu, where Naruto manipulates a storm with wind chakra into making a giant wind chakra construct of a Tengu to attack his opponents. That feels fitting. Naruto trains with Jiraiya and basically took his original ninja ID photo in kabuki makeup. I don't think I can stress to you how much he'd enjoy making a huge wind Tengu or wind Oni to blow his opponents away. And I personally would love a double page spread of an attack like that clashing with and canceling out with Sasuke's Kirin. Or if Naruto would have some form of disadvantage or unfamiliarity with any nature that wasn't his base wind affinity, that would as a result make them harder to learn and less powerful, we can just assume it would take double or higher the cost of what it took Naruto to master wind release, which he is again capable of, and that likely wouldn't even be that hard since we do see Naruto strain chakra reserves during this training, which is usually a rarity for him, but it's also something we know can lead to the growth of the chakra reserves themselves. So say if he had to use double or triple the effort to learn fire release, which is his natural weakness, and a la an avatar struggling with the element opposite theirs in the reincarnation cycle, then even if he attained no or even middling results, he'd still likely end up increasing his chakra reserves in the pursuit of it. And the other training methods could probably be done in the same way as the leap cutting method, since that was essentially just asking Naruto to do to an object of increasing size, durability, and complexity what the chakra nature test paper naturally does when it absorbs people's chakra. And in the case of those with wind, it splits itself down the middle, since the focus of wind release jutsu are usually powerful or critical hits like slashes and big bursts of pressurized air, whereas fire nature causes the paper to burn, and the jutsu of that release usually focus on devastating firepower and lingering damage, as well as sometimes forming a lot of constructs or traps meant to burn and disable. The stages of training methods for it could be something like first burning a leaf or controlling a flame, or possibly just the heat of something affecting the body. Then you could honestly ramp up to something like walking across burning coals, as that'd be a good one since you could develop fire chakra mastery by using the chakra walking technique to try and regulate the temperature into something safe to walk on. And finally, you could do something like condensing a massive blazing fire into a more contained yet very dense and still powerful flame, like plopping a student down into the middle of a forest fire and saying I want this contained small enough for camp later. And all that said, if by doing things like this, Naruto could learn all 5 base chakra natures with a teacher like Kakashi, he also could have learned any jutsu Kakashi was willing to teach him during that time, including the Chidori, even though it might be a bit useless to him, as it could be used with the Rasengan, or even just for Kakashi's will to be further inherited by his student, with it becoming a completed lightning style Rasengan. And still just remaining on the topic of the clone training method's effects on changes in chakra form and nature, as well as increased control and how good you could get at it, Naruto could also probably learn to implement this with his taijutsu and shadow clone techniques, since again the muscle memory of, say, the kata from taijutsu scrolls could be logged by a clone, as could the feeling and method of infusing your chakra nature into a punch, or coating your body in a cursed energy style to try and pull off different effects, like chakra modes, armors, or special types of attacks that you can't pull off any other way. He can also do lots of simple stuff, like learning, mastering, and evolving new basic skills, or polishing his already acquired branches on the skill tree into mastery, like learning to perform a single-handed Rasengan early, as if he gains that kind of chakra control, it would then simplify his original process to create the Rasengan plus elemental release fusion jutsu, allowing him to either not waste chakra by focusing on only one clone, or to now assign that freed up clone to a different task. This alone could open Naruto up to more variations of attacks and techniques, the way Sasuke constantly experimented with and changed the form of his chakra when using the Chidori. Imagine a wind-style Rasen shield. I know Konohamaru recently showed off a concept like this derived from Rasengan, with his wind-style Rasen barricade/berry. However, that's more performed by dispersing a Rasengan with wind chakra to make a strong obstruction of air, which impressively was able to block a Chidori launched by Hidari, a divine tree person derived from Sasuke. But what I'm thinking is something of a higher rank, and that's made almost as a direct homage to the Hyuga rotation technique, which Naruto got close and personal experience when the technique was performed by generational genes of the clan on him. The only drawback really being that it would have a backlash or recoil of some kind to use it, and he wouldn't have the extra sensory abilities of the Yakugan to use rotation to its full effect, at least until he gets a Sage Mode, and until that point he could just use the lower rank shield jutsu that Konohamaru used. But once Sage Mode is attained, which in this context would also of course be done easier, both the prior mentioned issues would be negated. In fact, the jutsu would probably be flat out stronger than a fully mastered rotation by that point, with a higher chance to critically wound with blowback or even eviscerate a foe like a master Rasengan performed like a fighting game parry that emanates from the body or palm in an instant. And while we're at it, let's also discuss a Rasen kunai that could differ from the shuriken, as that it focuses more on punching a precise point in an opponent's guard or shield, something that amplifies the destructive and penetrating power of the Rasengan into more of a drill or cone-like shape at the cost of Naruto needing to wield it and release the technique in melee range like the original Rasenshuriken was before Sage Mode, since that would now represent a range form for Rasengan in this concept. The main difference would be that instead of the poison-like effect of the shuriken, all the damage and energy of the attack would be focused into one singular point, because sometimes Naruto just wants to haul off and throw a haymaker. This Rasen kunai technique could also maybe be performed while wielding an actual kunai, alongside a more exaggerated change in the chakra's form, which could extend its range and give Naruto a way of nullifying Sasuke's Chidori enhanced Kenjutsu techniques, or just threatening his enemies with something similar. Since this technique probably wouldn't be all too different from the original Rasenshuriken post-Sage Mode unless you really tried to give it something like that, I would make the post-Sage Mode buff of the Rasen kunai be that after landing this attack, Naruto can pump more chakra in for a kind of meter burn that further condenses the Rasen kunai's piercing force into a beam able to hit enemies behind one another, or you can make it extremely effective at breaking through defensive techniques like barrier ninjutsu and perimeter sealing jutsu. And on top of these ideas of different changes in Rasengan form, none of this even scratches the surface of the widely interesting topic of the secondary effects of the different nature releases you could mix into the Rasengan, alongside its variants, as it's arguably kind of the potential man of ninjutsu, due to its versatility and its nature is pretty much raw weaponized chalk. You could sit around hypothesizing for hours about possible combos and effects, and I just mean with the basic natures, not even the other Kekkei Genkai ones that he could later use when he got the Sage of 6 pass mode. But just for a short idea of what I mean, consider a lightning style Rasen barrier that simultaneously nullifies an opponent's attack, blows them back, and leaves them paralyzed, or an earth style Rasen kunai that allows Naruto to burrow and drill through the ground at high speeds, letting him maneuver or land a devastating and heavy surprise attack with his ultimate move, much like the digging uppercut he used to defeat Neji. We're good ways into the script so far, and somehow I've only really discussed how broken early clone training would make Naruto in the realm of elemental release alone for the most part, with no major mention of things like sealing jutsu or anything else he could spend time and effort getting rather good at. This should also go to show why you really can't even give Naruto access to clone training too early in a story before, say, the time skip maybe, since it would make a great deal of his challenges easier by improving the gains from his training, or even just giving him extra battle experience by trying to experiment more through his clones when spamming them. Hell, Iruka once estimated that Naruto could go from getting to Jonin in 2 years, since that's how long the study of theory and elemental release would probably take anyway, but with this, he could legitimately do it in days or weeks, which would make his actual official shinobi rank even more useless than it already kinda is. Essentially, the clone training method from Naruto may be one of the most easily exploited training methods in fiction outside of ones like time-dilated training, since it's essentially the same thing just done in a different process. Actually, one of the only other ones that really stacks up to it in my opinion is also from the Naruto verse, since we've recently learned of a new method of training from Boruto's Two Blue Vortex called the Prescience Method, which involves the perception of and learning from alternate timelines and versions of yourselves, which may have advanced further beyond you to learn certain skills. It's also literally derived from something called a shun jutsu, which basically just means a god technique, but we've already seen it to be an extremely effective method of training. Not to mention, just imagine mixing the Prescience Method with high-level shadow clone training, the way Boruto presumably was probably able to do at least somewhat thanks to his own access to shadow clones and his full understanding of how they work. Hence another reason why the massive jump in strength he makes over his own time skip. This should also go to show why I think Kishimoto made sure not to abuse clone training, since really, in the grand scheme of things, even a bit more of it than Naruto pulled off in canon would quickly become overkill, as he'd pretty easily just be the strongest guy in the room in most situations until he met Madara. Maybe. And that's if the bad guys got that far, since as Kakashi said, this training method could only really work this wildly broken way for Naruto or someone with similar circumstances. So it's not even really one of those situations where the bad guys could even try to beat you at your own game. It's also just partly why shadow clones are such a desirable ability, both in verse and IRL, since with them they would allow people to live more of their lives without the very human fear of missing out bogging you down constantly. And that alone is massively useful even outside of sick ass ninja shit. Some people would just love to be able to make a maximum of 2 clones and that's it. You send one to work and maybe pull some overtime, you leave one at home and maybe catch up on the endless backlog of reading, gaming, and whatever other projects all people have in their minds to work on and complete someday but so rarely have the time for. While the real you will be free to have a lazy day, go to the gym, or on a trip whenever you want really. I think after seeing as much media as we have about clones, fewer people would be likely to want to have a whole bunch of themselves running around out there to the point of things getting complicated, but that may just be me. However, this video is growing quite long, but at the same time I was commissioned for the video with the key request that I, quote, yap to the point of insanity, unquote. So before we sign off, I'm actually going to be calling this video the prelude for this now miniseries. With that prelude now done, as we've established what exactly the clone training method is and how effective it could be if it were utilized early in the series and at a greater frequency. So in the next installments, yes, we are going to explore different routes the canon story of Naruto could have taken as a result of early use of clone training. Though to keep things interesting and to avoid repeating myself too much, as I've already pretty much gussed about what Naruto could get from this, I want to frame these routes both based on how early exactly he gets access to these training tricks, as well as the impacts this could have had on the other main members of Team 7 and Sakura, Sasuke, and Kakashi. So essentially, this miniseries will answer not only what would happen if Naruto got earlier access to clone training, but also if all of Team 7 made use of it to some varying degrees, and the theory crafting and technique building we can derive from that topic. And I'm so excited that I'm probably going to go ahead and just start on the next part now. So as always, take care of yourselves and the world around you, and as always, go beyond plus ultra. And I'll see you guys next time. Believe it.